All right, today we're going to try something a little different. We are going to decode a set of pretty complex intelligence reports that describe a new kind of conflict. And this isn't happening on some distant battlefield. No, it's happening in our own cities, in our own systems. The weapons aren't what you'd think. We're talking about information and even economic policy. So, let's dive in.
So the first thing you notice when you start digging into these documents is the language. It's weird. It's super specific, dense, and not at all like what you hear on the news. Take this phrase, kinetic synthesis. What does that even mean? It's cold, it's technical, and that's our first clue that we're looking at something different here.
And it doesn't stop there. The next term that just jumps off the page is psych war smog, right? It almost sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, but it's describing something very, very real. You start to see a pattern here, a kind of specialized vocabulary that feels like it's designed to hide what's really going on, not explain it. And then you get to this one, hollow crown kabuki. You see, this isn't just random confusing jargon. The analysis is really clear on this point. This is the language of strategy. It's a very precise way of talking about actions and goals that are meant to be kept out of the public eye. Which, of course, brings us to the big question we're tackling today. What if this isn't just bureaucratic noise? What if what we're looking at is the actual language of modern power? Our job, right here, right now, is to translate it. We're going to cut through that fog and try to piece together the real story happening behind the headlines. So, the analysis breaks this whole conflict down into two separate but totally connected arenas, two theaters, as they call them. The first one isn't fought with bullets or bombs, it's fought with words, with stories, with perception. This is the information war.
The term the reports use for this is psych war, and really, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a battle for your mind. The whole goal is to control the story, to shape how you interpret events, and maybe most importantly, to build the justification for things that are about to happen in the real world. It's about creating a reality before it even exists.
And this slide right here shows you exactly how that psych war works in practice. The source talks about a dual framing of recent protests. So on the left, you've got this narrative of peaceful, democratic resistance. But on the right, you see the exact same events being painted as dangerous, orchestrated threats to the country. And here's the absolute key. According to this analysis, creating that division, that's the entire point. So, okay, how do you get from a war of words to actual physical action? Well, the analysis points to this very specific tactic it calls pseudo-chaos. It's kind of a rhetorical magic trick. You take real events, like riots happening way over in Portland or LA, and you use language to transfer that feeling of chaos and danger to a completely different situation. You create this story of a nation in total disorder, which, makes bringing in the military locally seem like a pretty reasonable and necessary step. Okay, so that's the war of words. Now we have to pivot to where things get very, very real. This is where that psych war starts to have real-world consequences. This is where the stories and narratives turn into actual boots on the ground. And the term the report uses for this physical world is soma. It's a simple word, but it covers everything tangible. We're talking troops, yes, but also buildings, infrastructure, and even the economic health of the people. It's the real-world chessboard where the pieces are actually moved. And that physical presence is not small. The intelligence says 2,375 National Guard troops were deployed in Washington, D.C. Now, just to be clear, that is not a small security detail. That's a pretty substantial military force operating in the capital of the country, a city that isn't a war zone. Now look at this timeline. Because this is where, according to the analysis, it gets really critical. You see the legal groundwork for the deployment is built on those past riots we just talked about. But check the timing. The order to extend the deployment is signed on November 4th, just one day before major protests are scheduled to start. The report suggests this is pretty clear evidence of a preemptive move, getting a military force in place specifically to manage political protest. So on the ground, what does this look like? Well, it's very visible. The source material details armed patrols in public parks, a heavy presence at subway stations and transit hubs. It's a clear, very open military posture. This is the kinetic part of that kinetic synthesis we saw earlier. It's the physical assertion of control. But then there's this. And this, according to the report, is one of the most subtle and effective tactics being used. At the very same time that troops are on armed patrol, they're also doing yard work. The report has a name for this. Normalization through banality.
And the psychological effect is just huge, because when you see soldiers doing these totally mundane, everyday chores, their extraordinary presence starts to feel, well, ordinary. It softens the public's view of what is, for all intents and purposes, a military occupation of public space.
But this physical war, this soma, it isn't just about troops. The analysis makes it really clear that economic policy itself can be used as a weapon. In this situation, a government shutdown isn't just politics as usual. It's a strategic tool of control.
And you really don't have to read between the lines on this one. This is a direct quote from the source material, and it lays the strategy out in the open. Food assistance for 42 million Americans, the SNAP program, was explicitly called out not as a vital safety net, but as a political bargaining chip.
Now, to really get how this leverage works, you have to understand the difference between these two kinds of programs. Think of it like this. On the left, SNAP is mandatory spending. It's supposed to run on autopilot. But on the right, you have programs like Head Start, which are discretionary. That means they are totally vulnerable every single year. The strategy described here was to create a huge public fight over the protected program while quietly letting the vulnerable one just collapse. And this is the real-world result. We're not talking about abstract policy anymore. This is the human cost. The analysis shows that even with SNAP's protections, a change in the payment formula meant over 1 million households got zero benefits. At the same time, 65,000 kids were picked out of Head Start, and thousands of their teachers and staff were suddenly out of a job. And the ripple effect just keeps going. See, when a program like Head Start vanishes, it isn't just about education. It's about childcare. And for low-wage parents who can't just work from home, losing childcare means losing their job. The report calls this a targeted labor shock, and it hits working mothers the hardest, creating this whole second wave of economic pain.
So you have an information war shaping how people think, and an economic war putting on real-world pressure. The big question is, what's the endgame here? Where does all this lead? The last part of the intelligence report tries to predict just that.
The analysis basically lays out 3 possible ways this could go. You've got your best case, where a real long-term solution is found. Then you've got the worst case, which is a complete breakdown. But it's that one in the middle, the most likely scenario, that's the one the report tells us to really pay attention to. And this is the most critical prediction in the whole document. The most probable outcome is just a temporary patch, a short-term fix. The immediate crisis goes away, but none of the underlying problems get solved. And the implication of that? It proves the strategy worked. It validates the idea that creating a crisis using people's economic well-being is an effective political tool, which of course means it's absolutely going to be used again. So when you boil this whole intelligence brief down, the biggest takeaway is this. We're living in a new reality of political conflict. It's a war fought on 2 fronts at the same time. A war for your perception and a war on your physical and economic stability. And the thing is, the two are designed to work together perfectly. And all of that leaves us with one last, really tough question. If manufacturing a crisis is now just part of the standard political playbook, and if we're always living in this psych war fog, how are we supposed to tell the difference anymore? How do we know what's a genuine crisis and what's a manufactured one that's just designed for political gain? That, I think, is the challenge for all of us going forward.